Hi everyone, and welcome to the part 2 of the Helldiver series. So following on from part 1, going through the whole install and what we want to do with the project, this next video was initially going to be kind of skipped past very slowly around the fuel system, but as you'll see as the video goes on, the fuel system turned out to be a little bit more messy than I was expecting, let's say. So as I said before in the part 1, when I went to pick it up, we actually ran the engine, so I assumed that the fuel tank and kind of fuel systems would be pretty set up and all good, ready to go with no issues. But as always, it's best to check those fuel tanks because as you'll see very shortly, that wasn't quite the case. So without further ado, let's get to it. And this is why we check the fuel tanks. So look at that, all old and gunked up and full of all sorts of nice things that would have got into the fuel system that we don't want. So we're going to clean the tank out, get rid of all that gunk inside there, all the little bits that we don't want in the system, replace the fuel tube in, the clunk's bent over on itself, which obviously isn't going to end well in flight. So yeah, we're going to redo it how I want it, how I usually set fuel tanks up, and get that all looking better. So just look at the colour of these things. So this was all the way bent back on itself, the colour and dirt on that filter, all the tubing was all, it's got holes and cuts in it. I honestly don't know how this actually even ran, and just look at all the rubbish that's come out of the inside of the fuel tank already. I've not even cleaned it out yet. So all of this would have been ingested into the engine. So yeah, always a good idea to check the fuel tank. Next up, it's just working out what I've already got in stock from my bits and bobs. Fuel tubing, new bungs, I use the barbs and sintered fuel clunk. We've got some brass tube. I like to use this Sullivan ProFlex tube inside the tank, which is a little bit more better wearing than Tygon. Doesn't go hard as easy. So yeah, the intent, I've also filled this up with some white vinegar inside, and been letting this sit in for a few hours, and you can see, well, you can't really see in potentially this light, but there's a lot of little bits in there that have come loose from that, and it's got rid of a lot of the marks that you could see that were hanging around in there. And for the final few last bits, we'll just give it a bit of a scrub with maybe something like an old toothbrush or whatever else we can get our hands on to clean that, and that should be all good to go then to prepare back for install. So yeah, just going over what we need to order and get this prepared. So the fuel tank's all emptied now and cleaned out, so you can see it's so much better. There's no real marks in there. Any marks that there are on the outside now. The inside is pretty clean. So yeah, all I did was use the white vinegar mainly to sit in it for a while and got rid of all this gunk and rubbish that was inside the tank. Then I just washed it through with some hot water and used just an old toothbrush to give it a scrub and a wipe down of any kind of stubborn bits that were stuck on the inside, and just washed it all out. So yeah, that's pretty much good to go. So now we can get working on creating the inside fuel tubes and pipe work, and getting it set up ready to install back in the Helldiver. So one of the first steps is just to solder on some of these brass barbs. So this clunk doesn't come with one on, so I have some little brass barbs that I just like to put on there and solder in place. Same with the piping that will go in between that and the tank connection. The idea of the piping, as you'll see once it's all done, is it stops any kinking back inside the fuel tank and keeps it at the back of the fuel tank, which is where you want it to be. I have to admit, soldering isn't my favourite job, but I try my best. So I have a couple of different soldering irons that I use. I have either this Dremel gas powered one, or I've also recently bought this from Aldi, which is a really fast kind of heating up temperature sort of USB chargeable powered one. So literally you just charge it up with a USB and you pretty much just turn it on, hold it in to turn it on, and it's got power, and you hold that button and within seconds it heats the tip up to 480 degrees. So it's a really fast acting soldering iron. Look, there you go, already up to temperature 480 degrees. So it's got a couple of little lights on the end there, and as soon as you're done with it you just let go and it starts cooling down and you can put it back. And then when you want it again, you just hold over the pressure point there. So it's a really handy tool to have for those quick jobs, or maybe where you're at the field, or those sort of jobs. Yeah, found it really useful for just the little soldering jobs like this. So once it's green, you should see that the heat's there. Yeah, it's already burning the solder, so instantly there. And then we're just gonna apply that. So all we're just looking to do is make sure that it's got a bit of solder around the brass connections, and make sure it's all tight and won't come off under stress from the fuel tube going over it. Okay, so once we've got the clunk all soldered on with the barb and onto the clunk, and I've not done it yet, but once we've done the other pipes we can get that all installed. So as I mentioned earlier, I'll be using this ProFlex tube, which is a little bit more hard wearing and long lasting inside the fuel tanks, so it doesn't really go hard like Tygon does, so it's less chance of maintenance, less checking that you have to do inside the fuel tank. You can kind of almost fit and forget, really. I would still recommend checking that now and again just to make sure, but so far it's all been good. So yeah, obviously Tygon, like the one that we took off, things just go hard and stiff and full of all sorts of mess, whereas this stuff generally doesn't. So as normal, it can be a bit hard to first get on and in place, but once you get that all installed, it's ready to go. So what we'll do is also wire lock it, as I do with all my fuel connections, just for proper bolts and braces. You know it's secure and nothing's going to come off over the fuel barb wire lock as well. It's a nice secure fitting going into the fuel tank. So what I'm going to do is put it onto a time lapse and take through the full setup of this, and then we'll get it installed back into the model. Okay, so fast forward a little bit. So we've soldered a few parts together. Well, not soldered, but put all the brass fittings together. So we've got a new fuel bung. So I've set it up so that we've got the bottom one here is going to be the clunk line. So I'm going to put a brass fitting on a brass barb on either end of the clunk line. This one, the smaller one, will be the fill line, fill and drain, and then this one of course is the vent line, so that will go up into the top of the tank for the vent. And then this one will be an additional tube that will go on the end of the clunk, so there will be a small bit of the Sullivan tubing in between these two connections to allow that to move. And then the final bit of fitting will be on the end of the clunk onto that, so it will just allow movement up and down inside the fuel tank with that clunk hitting the back, all the while providing saving that being able to bend back on itself, and it's hard wearing with the brass and this sort of tubing, so it lasts a lot longer. So next up, we're just going to get these few barbs just soldered on, and then we can start getting the tubing in place. So a little bit further along, so you can start to see the rough idea of how this is going to work. So that's obviously the bung of how on the side profile, once it fits in, sit roughly like that on the end there. And then we have this part, which I've made up. So we've got the clunk there on the end with a brass tube and the wire lock holding it on, and that's flexible with that tube on the end there to move about. And then you've got brass tube in the middle with another section on the end there. So what we're then going to do is measure where we want it to sit so that the clunk can freely move around at the end, up and down, and then cut the fuel tube and stick it on the clunk line there. The result being then that this will be flexible inside there to move up and down along that back where all the fuel obviously will be in flight, and without being able to bend back on itself, and yeah, is probably the best way that I generally do all my petrol models now. So yeah, we'll get on with doing that next. So the inside of the clunk and tank is all done now. So we have the main fuel line. So we've got the clunk on the end there, which is flexible with that little bit of tubing, the brass to keep it in place and stop it bending back, and then the flexibleness there at the end to allow it to move up and down, side and to side inside the tank. Of course, all connected up and wire locked. Then we've got the vent tube that just goes to the top of the tank, and then the filler and drain line that I like to put in, so that's going to the back of the tank. No, I didn't use the brass or the kind of Sullivan flex tube on the fill line because it's not as important. At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter if the that even bends back on itself, because all we're doing is using it for filling and draining the tank. So then that can go in place, and roughly once it's in there, they sit nicely just at the back. So we want to just make sure, plug it all in, and kind of hold the tank up and have a wiggle around and make sure that they're moving freely at the bottom there and not getting stuck on the back of the tank, and or anything like that. Any obstructions, make sure they can move freely about. And then yeah, and then the inside's done. It's then just time to put the wires, the tube in on the end there and get them in place, and then install the tank back into position. So the fuel tank's all ready to go now. The fuel lines are all in place. So we've got one line for the vent, one line for the fill, and one line for the main clunk to the carb. All of them have been wire locked in place. The main clunk tank also has a barb soldered on there just as an extra help to keep anything from coming off. And I've left full long lengths on the fuel tanks so that we can pull them through and then cut them to what length we need. So when I took the tank out, I left a little trail of string through where the hole it came out of. So I tie this around, the plan is to tie this around the fuel lines, and then as you push the tank into place, you can pull the fuel lines through and out the little hole that they came out of, which is under there somewhere. There we go. So that little string can pull through the fuel lines, and then we can get them all in place. Just working out where to sit it all. So the carb line has to go on there, and then I think probably make use of these holes on the side for the vent and fuel lines somehow. But yeah, almost there now. I didn't really video this next bit because I didn't really know what I was doing myself, to be honest. So I was just kind of working it out as I was going along. But so I've attached that bit on the carb and wire locked it, as we've seen. And then what I've decided to do is kind of create a little mount inside this hole. So I got just an offcut of wood and glued that into the inside there. Well, before I did, I kind of made it to shape with some sanding and cutting, and then I had a couple of leftover kind of 3D printed mounts that I've previously made for holding tubes and things. So I just put a couple of those in there for the fuel tube, and then I've got one line in here which is the vent, which will stay in place and should exit the the side of the fuzz nicely, just for any excess fuel to drain out when I'm filling. And then the other one is a fill line which I can pull out and allows me to fill, and then push it back in there, and yeah, just sits it kind of nicely out of view, and secures it from flying around outside the fuzz. So we'll see how we get on with it anyway. And yeah, I'm just working out the inside here just to make sure that the tubes are not going to be hitting anything like the exhaust, for example. So I'm thinking of just making some sort of little thing to hold them back here so that they can slide in and out without going near there. But other than that, we're pretty much done on the fuel side of things. All the electronics and everything are all in place. The fuel tank's in. So yeah, I think we're pretty much ready to run the engine now. We'll just get the prop back on. I'm going to leave the cowl off for the initial engine runs just in case it needs any tweaking, but from when I ran it up before I bought it, it seemed to run fine, so I can't see much adjustment needed with it being a petrol engine, but we'll see. So yeah, all good to go. Prop and spinner now all back on and ready for running. So we'll get it all set up when we've got a chance to get outside to the field and give it some test runs. Well, that brings us to the end of this video. Hope you've enjoyed it. Make sure to subscribe to my channel to keep up to date on all the latest videos. And don't forget, it's free, so you have no excuse. Make sure to drop a comment in the video or drop me a message to let me know if you'd like to see anything else in my videos. And if you haven't already, follow the link tree either in my profile or usually in the description of the video that will take you to an online portal to access any of my other social media channels. I post a lot on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, whatever it may be that you're on, I'm on it. So go on and follow it. As quite often my content varies from platform to platform. I don't often post the same stuff, so be sure to follow in them all. If you're on Facebook, be sure to check out the brand new RC Plane Guy Community Facebook group, which is a whole new space I've created primarily for you as the viewers, and to be able to interact with each other, comment, post your own photos and videos, share that experience and knowledge that's out there. I know there's so many different aspects of the hobby out there, and it's great to see everyone enjoying it and showcasing it for yourselves. So make sure you join the group and post some content, because it's great to see, and I really want to build that into a great place